Good morning. I'm beginning today with a reading from Psalm 137, reading verses 1 and 2 and then 4. By the rivers of Babylon, there we sat down and there we wept when we remembered Zion. On the willows there we hung up our harps. How could we sing the Lord's song in a foreign land? So, for temple worship, the worship leaders had brought to a service a song that was based on memories of their ancestors having been in captivity in Babylon, torn from their homes, taken into a foreign land, unsettled, unsafe feeling, unsure of themselves, and called upon to worship, if they were going to worship, in a completely unfamiliar setting. Now add to this the assumed theology of the situation, which carries throughout most of Hebrew Scripture and Christian Scripture and into much Christian theology today. The assumption that anything that goes awry, anything that goes wrong, as well as good stuff, but that's for another sermon, anything that goes wrong is God's fault, is God's doing, is God's will. So there were a number of reasons that they hung their handheld harps on willow trees and said that they couldn't sing a song for the Lord or a song of the Lord in a foreign land. It wasn't because they forgot how to play the harps. It was a theological, perhaps to some degree a psychological concern. They were not familiar with how to worship outside the normal context for them. And then this nagging problem behind it all. The thought, well, the conviction that they were there in the first place because God was punishing them. So how do you pray to the God who has punished you with captivity for some sort of relief from the conditions of captivity or escape from captivity, if that is part of your punishment, which they certainly thought it to be? Becomes theologically questionable, doesn't it? Those of us in our homes and small gathering places during these days of the coronavirus are going through the reverse of that, a reverse kind of captivity. We are confined, many of us, for our well-being and the well-being of others, to a small place. Some of us are alone. Some of us are with a couple of family members or a few. Some of us are not getting out much at all. Some of us not at all. Those of us who worship on a regular basis at our synagogues or our mosques or our churches are used to worshiping in those places. Perhaps we have private devotions, but those are supplemented by our gatherings with larger groups of people, and now most of us can't do that. So, can we sing the Lord's song in confinement in a strange land? Some of us, and I speak exclusively in a Christian context, are accustomed to kind of lazy worship, if you will. We're used to going to our churches and kind of sitting back for the show, letting other people, the choir and the soloists, the pastor, do it all for us. And we sit back waiting to be inspired or encouraged or whatever. But we don't contribute very much to the worship experience except by being present, which is no small thing. Don't get me wrong there. But now we don't have that, most of us. Can we sing the Lord's song in this barren kind of place in which we now live? A couple of weeks ago, in the first of these online conversations to take the place of face-to-face conversations at Silverside Church, way back when I thought it might be a couple of weeks, now we're looking at, encouragingly, at the possibility of being back face-to-face on May the 17th. That depends on when our governor lifts the ban on face-to-face gatherings, which is supposed to end on May the 15th. I said 2 weeks ago that one of the problems that people have to face in these times is residue from the notion that God is behind human suffering. That ties into what the people in the temple were singing based on this psalm as a result of what their ancestors had experienced and passed down for them to remember generation after generation. So, yes, there was sadness and trauma, disappointment, frustration, fear, all of those things. There was also some uncertainty about whether or not God traveled, which ultimately would be answered with a resounding yes, but perhaps not everyone at the time was convinced of that. So, but the answer to the question, can we sing the Lord's song in a foreign land, in their context for many of them was no. They couldn't, they didn't know how for the various reasons I've described and others. But our answer, can we sing the Lord's song in a foreign land, in a strange land, in awkward circumstances, should be yes. We should benefit from the communities in which we gather, with which we gather, people that we know over a period of time as our faith communities. Absolutely, that is true, and we should benefit from what those who lead worship offer us, but we should be learning all along that our contribution matters a whole lot too, that active worship is vital. What the people who are standing at the pulpit or on the platform are doing is important, but it's not just to entertain us or help us pass the time or to passively inspire us. We should be engaged, and that should be an impetus to help us go out into the world and continue private worship, if you will. And then when circumstances come that are complicated, and these are indeed terribly complicated circumstances, the likes of which most of us have never known, we should be able to sing the Lord's song in foreign lands like this, even if we are all alone. Because God does travel, because God does not cause illness and tragedy, God does not send people into captivity, because God is present with every one of us. Whether we realize it or not, whether we desire it or not, we can certainly block it. But God's presence is a reality. There's a prayer I'm going to share with you in written form, a prayer for this time in which we're living, an interfaith prayer. We'll refer you to a link that will get you to that prayer, that you'll be able to pray in your own way, in your own time, and share with others if you will. And also let me be sure to say, because I have forgotten to say up to this point, that the lovely music that you have heard and will be hearing on this recording has been played by our extraordinarily talented musician at Silverside Church, Melissa Hayai. To those of you who have become regular listeners to these conversations, welcome. I hope all of you are doing well through these complicated times. And let us do all that we can to support one another, and let us celebrate the accomplishments that are being made at defeating the effects of the disease. I hope this is a good week for you.